of them. Any corrections, additions, changes?
Make a motion to approve.
Seeing any opposed? All right, I'll go into the chair's report. Welcome to our July meeting. Since our special guest today is President Byford, we need to be really efficient in this part of our meeting so we can preserve our full second hour for Andy. We are steadily approaching the April 2019 suspension of L train service west of Bedford Avenue, in other words, between Bedford and 8th Avenue. And MTA, New York City Transit, and the city continue to refine plans for alternative transportation during that time. And some of the plans are really things that we have asked for a long time. The reopening of closed entrances along the Broadway, Brooklyn, JM and Z lines, for instance. New interline transfers where lines cross but never had a transfer, such as Livonia Junius, which is actually going to be in the capital program, 21st Street and Hunters Point Avenue between the G and the 7, Broadway and Hughes Street between the G and the J and M. I mean, there's some really great things. While many of those may not remain, Livonia Junius definitely is going to remain. So the city and DOT and Transit are continuing to refine plans for that 15-month period. Everyone recognizes that although considerable study has gone into determining the impacts of the L closure and the effectiveness of the measures to deal with the loss of service, we won't know the exact impacts of the closure and mitigation until the shutdown actually occurs. And I'm sure everyone has heard the M14 SBS 14th Street route will begin before the April 2019 shutdown to see how it works and to refine it in time for the April 2019 closure. They're actually going to launch those on Sunday, January 6th of 2019, several months ahead of the April closure. The date is contingent on the completion of modifications to 14th Street, physical modifications to support an SBS route, and those are being undertaken by DOT, and I am sure as the Commissioner of DOT is on the MTA, we will all have great knowledge and advanced knowledge of how that's going. In addition to giving New York City Transit and New York City DOT the opportunity to evaluate the new service and make modifications before the L train shutdown, launching the service in January gives riders a chance to try the new service and become familiar with it while considering how they can use the new service once the April shutdown occurs. Of course, if you're going interborough, you're not going to use it. You're going to stay on the L train until you can't use the L train anymore. But, I mean, just for 14th Street travel, it will give you an idea. The M14 SBS will operate in concert with the existing M14A and M14D services, which will continue in their present form with minor stop modifications in the Union Square area. Just before the L tunnel reconstruction begins, the M14 SBS will be extended east to the planned Stuyvesant Cove ferry terminal, which is around 19th Street and the East River. With the M14 SBS service in place, 14th Street buses will be scheduled to run every 2 minutes during peak hours. Scheduled, key word there, scheduled. But with other traffic being not allowed on 14th Street, that should be pretty accurate. It's not going to be the normal 14th Street by any means. So, the M14 SBS isn't the only new SBS service in the news last week. New York City Transit announced it will implement the B82 SBS in the fall of this year. Chris was at the board meeting to congratulate folks on that. Some of you may remember the B82 faced community opposition related to new bus lanes and parking restrictions in the corridor. Some of the merchants, I believe, were worried how they would get deliveries along Kings Highway. And New York City DOT and Transit engaged in discussions with the elected officials, community leaders, and finalized the service plan. After this agreement and some changes to the original plan, the start of service was approved by New York City Transit, and it will begin this fall. Bill Henderson spoke at the Transit Committee to urge board members to support the implementation of B82 SBS. Carol, who's not here, I guess.
She's on vacation.
Okay.
She's in Buffalo.
All right. Bill and Ellen had an initial meeting with Alex Elegudin, New York City Transit's new Senior Advisor for System-Wide Accessibility. Although he's only been on the job about a month, Mr. Elegudin is making rapid progress in setting up a new structure within transit to promote accessibility in the system. Of course, accessibility is a big piece of New York City Transit's Fast Forward plan, and you're going to hear a lot more about that today when President Byford discusses it. Last week, Bradley and Ellen attended Transit Center's Access Delayed event, where Controller Stringer's new report on ADA transit deserts, the Fast Forward plan, and state of the effort to increase subway accessibility were discussed. A major piece of New York City Transit's accessibility efforts is the addition of ADA elevators in existing stations, with a major effort currently underway to evaluate the feasibility of making each of the current non-accessible stations accessible. That is, what would it take, is it possible given the layout of the station and the surface conditions above, obviously. Construction of new elevators is also moving forward, most recently with the announcement that New York City Transit will begin construction on elevators and accessibility improvements for the Greenpoint Avenue station in Brooklyn. This will take time, as illustrated in the 28-month duration of the Greenpoint Avenue project. 28 months?
Yep.
Yikes.
We're gonna do one side and then the other.
Well, that makes you can't. So you'll be able to get there, you just won't be able to get back.
I don't know what the closing's gonna be like.
But if it receives adequate resources, New York City Transit's commitment is that in 5 years, no inaccessible station will be more than 2 stations from an accessible alternative. I can figure out one place where that might not be possible, but hopefully that's the only place. Exactly, that's it. I don't know how you do it there. Of course, we're also seeing continued major work on stations. Up next are stations on the B, D, and 3 lines in Harlem and the Bronx at 145th, 167th, and 174, 175 on the concourse. Like stations that have been recently renovated, these projects will include both structural repairs and modernization. And by the way, you get lots of countdown clocks once this happens. On many B division stations, there's one, if you're lucky, one. And when these ESI stations are done, they're going to be up and down the platform. Yes.
Or do you want to finish it, because you just mentioned countdown clocks.
Yeah, let me get through this.
Okay, and then I'll
Thank you.
talk about
145th Street station, which is at St. Nicholas, I mean at Lenox Avenue, has already closed for this work, and the remaining stations will close to passengers this August. As with other stations completed under the Enhanced Station Initiative, work on these stations is scheduled to be complete so that, well, they're going to do everything at once, so stations are closed 6 months or less. That's the point here. So they're not, out for really long periods of time. The MTA's Poetry in Motion program has introduced poetry into New York's transit system since '92, except for a brief interruption during the MTA's financial crisis in the early 2000s. In celebration of the program, an exhibit, Poetry in Motion at 25, I can't believe it's been 25 years of that, is in place at Grand Central Terminal's New York Transit Museum Annex, and includes examples of the car and bus cards that have featured more than 200 poems or excerpts of poems over the years. Carol and Bill attended the opening reception to the exhibit and recommend you see it before it closes, which will be on October 28th. As you may have seen, the MTA has launched beta versions of its transit app and new website. There is broad support for integrating MTA agencies' apps into a single package, and the new app is seeking to provide some valuable features, but the app and website are definitely a work in progress that can benefit greatly from rider input. You can access, if you haven't already, the new app and website at new.mta.info and lend your voice. Many of us already have our opinions on how this can be improved.
Are they listening?
Yes, but we certainly hope, not that you would know it yet because they haven't made the, but it's definitely going to be upgraded and updated, I think, like every 30 days we were told, so that's good news.
Now, upgrade rather
Upgrade.
than update.
Oh, well, no, they'll be doing both, actually.
Okay, because they
You may
Constant
remember,
improvement, as Ellen knows.
you may remember a few years ago, Transit piloted bike racks on the S53 and S93 buses for bikers who need to get over the Verrazano Bridge, which has no provisions for bikes or pedestrians. The pilot proved successful, and now bike racks will be permanently installed on buses serving the Q50, the BX23, the S53, and the S93 routes. Bicycle racks on these routes allow riders to take a bike over major MTA-operated crossings and make last mile, that's in quotes, connections to areas that are not conveniently served by buses, such as Co-op City. Well, Co-op City has buses.
It has buses
A lot
on
of
the
buses,
outside,
yeah.
yeah.
The bike racks are available to hold two bikes per bus, and riders must load and unload their own bicycles onto the racks, for obvious reasons. As is our usual practice in August, we will have a members-only field trip and not meet officially again until September 27th. Earlier in the month, on September 6th, however, the PCAC will meet, the full PCAC. Arrangements for all of these meetings are still in process, and we will provide you all with more information as it becomes available. Finally, because several of our members were unaware that Bill Henderson will be retiring, I want to again note that Bill will be leaving us in early October. The PCAC Executive Committee has been working with MTA Human Resources Department to identify a successor to Bill, and we will keep you informed as the process moves forward. Okay. About something I brought up, right?
Yes.
Countdown clocks?
Countdown clock.
All right.
You said that as the stations are being repaired, I will bring to your attention that it is now a year and a half since the Second Avenue, I brought it to a lot of people's attention, including Andy's, and I'll do it again. But it's now a year and a half since a little more than a year and a half, since the Second Avenue subway, the Q line, 3 stations open. Andrew, this is for
I'm
you.
listening, I just want to make, see if I can block this temporarily, because it's blocked.
Fire. You're gonna start a fire with that.
Yeah, right.
Some of them have a thing that you
It's
can
not-
slide.
You just turn it off.
That's what I was looking for. Okay.
Okay, now, may I say again,
Go ahead.
a year and a half, more than a year and a half, since 3 stations on the Second Avenue subway opened, no, 4 if you count 63rd Street, which was partially open. There is still no real countdown clocks. The only thing that are at those stations are something that just tells you the date and the time. And if there are going to be countdown clocks whenever the stations are being renovated, I would think, I mean, it really is.
Many
you
people
don't
have
know
mentioned that to me.
You don't know how many people scream at me about that. I mean, there are also, the place for the newsstands are still empty. People now use those for seats, and they just sit on the counter or whatever. And, but the fact that those things are there, and there are beeline, on other beeline stations, even not being
Point made.
repaired. Okay, so
Okay.
can we find out what?
Let's everyone, because we
Can
have a
we
big
find,
agenda
look,
today,
can we
let's
find
be
out
brief.
what and why? Okay, and then something else you brought up in your report that we got here, SBS. As I had told you on the phone, I had this woman who had me on the phone for an hour and a half talking about the 23rd Street SBS. But the one thing that everybody still complains about, even though they have now put in the smallest type possible on the machines, you know, hold on to your,
Yeah.
the Gestapo is out again in full force, at least on 23rd Street, otherwise
Eagle
known
Team.
as the Eagle Team. We call it the Gestapo. And again, people are who do they call? They're calling me, what more than you. So if you can maybe note, I don't think they can, well, they can certainly write, you know, put paint over and just scroll on there. All they have to do is put it in bigger letters, the same letters that say, pay here, right underneath, it can be that size type, and it can be
When we had our
other-
bus meeting, did that come up yesterday?
No, I was gonna bring it up, but I didn't want to, there was just too much to
Okay,
bring
I'll
up.
bring it up with them
So
again.
I will bring it up, if you
Thank you.
want, I can mention it again, but it's really,
I'll bring it up.
okay, thank you.
I got them to at least put the thing on, so hopefully.
Yeah, but you, unless you have a
Brief.
big magnifying glass
Go
or
ahead.
telescope, you don't
I'm
see
gonna
it.
be brief. The one thing I did speak last day was not just the 82 SBS, it was the B44 SBS.
Yes,
Because it's
additional
having an
stop.
R.
Yeah.
But if we do have a chance, can we find out what day is it gonna be at stopping there?
Yeah, I think that's partially up to DOT and
Yeah.
how quickly they can do that, so.
If you can find out from your MTN and then.
I wish you had asked me that yesterday when
I
I was
did
with
that, I
Commissioner
did.
Trottenberg, I could have found out, but,
I emailed you.
the service in some of this building is not. Anyway, let me give you a little bit about the board report because this week's meetings were like unlike any other meetings we've had in.
Oh, yes,
They were just very long, everybody had a lot to say, and the key issues at yesterday's board meeting were Executive Order 168 that the governor put into effect in 2017, declaring a state of emergency in the subway system and allowing the governor and management and MTA to quickly implement various procurement items without going through the board. Now, when I say without going through the board, eventually it comes back to the board for ratifications, many of which happened yesterday and which set off a firestorm of opposition. What are we, just rubber stamps now? Why don't we find out what's happening on this? Maybe we need extra meetings so that we can vote on these in a timely fashion. People really want information about these procurements, and some of the procurements, and I think a couple of the board members had very valid points, were not related to the emergency. Some of them were about procurements for CBTC that were kept coming later in 2 or 3 years away, and other items which really couldn't be necessarily deemed an emergency. So that discussion went on, and the chairman said, we will get you information. I said, perhaps you could give us, before being asked, not that I have a vote, but before being asked to ratify these things, how these things are going, what you think has happened
Very good
in
input.
respect to these ratifications, and do we need any further? And so everybody made suggestions. The chairman said, we will do something. I asked, how long does Executive Order 168 last? I mean, is it in perpetuity? They really did not have an answer for
Well, they
that.
said it's renewed every 30 days.
It is renewed every 30 days. I mean,
automatically.
it's quite a vehicle to get things through rapidly, and some of the board rightfully was concerned, if you have these procurements done so rapidly, you may not have the competition that you would like to see on some of these, which means the prices might be higher if you don't have competition. So, I am sure
It was a great discussion.
Many of
it's a hell of a discussion.
Lively.
Lively is one word for it.
Many of the things that come through the executive order end up being non-competitive or
Yes,
at
and
least
that's
not-
troublesome.
Not bid. They're, somebody makes 5 phone calls and asks how much it would cost for this.
Right, and plus, if you've already done part of this, you probably have a real inside track to the next part of that. And is that fair?
Right, the information the board asked for to be informed on what is not allowing competition and all of that stuff. How has the contractor performed before? That's all. It's good you'll be getting that.
I hope we'll be getting that. I know that this was heard in Albany, and this was all sides. This was the governor's people as well as the mayor's people.
And didn't Larry, I thought he said, send me what you want, send me and so that communication outline.
He also had some choice words in the next part, which I'm
No, he
going to
didn't.
get into. And obviously, the next really big discussion was the July financial plan, the 4% fare and toll hikes scheduled for likely to take effect March of 2019 and March of 2021. There was quite a discussion about that, about Tim Mulligan's report, which had happened in transit, about riders leaving the system, why it's likely they're leaving the system, what this means for the future, when they're likely to come back, what a wall of GOs as you enter a station, how off-putting that is to riders who may say, oh, the hell with this, I'll just take an Uber or a Lyft or a Via. The loss of ridership in the Bronx and Queens is really traceable to the number of GOs going on in places and the unpredictability of what weekend service will be running, where it will be running. So there was that discussion, the discussion of very much needing a new, dependable source of funding for the MTA, while many of the news reports last night and this morning took that to mean more fare hikes. I think the chairman and others were actually referring to something like a congestion pricing or another kind of fee that would be dedicated to the MTA, and obviously one that could not be pilfered by anybody. Then we had Commissioners Pally and Zuckerman, who represent the far-flung reaches of the commuter rail system, very much expressing their opposition to having people who now have the highest base fare of anyone in the system, and frequently not at all the most affluent members of the tri-state region, having to pay by far the largest amount. And of course, Bob Ferran mentioned how there was a cap on people in Putnam, Dutchess, and Eastern Suffolk for those fare zones, and how they wouldn't be paying the exact same increase. Nevertheless, those two board members and others are very much looking to congestion pricing or something to help mitigate and or ameliorate ever increasing fares. And as I frequently say, if you take these and by the way, I don't know why this was a surprise to all of these news people. If they were at all paying attention, it was pretty clear in 2011 that there was going to be every other year fare hikes.
Yeah.
It's been an
pennies.
ongoing.
Yeah.
Right, it just makes a good,
They were surprised.
it makes a good story.
I know it does. I know it does. But please.
These fare increases were basically announced a year ago.
And if you really want to know, when they began, they were 4% yields, which means they were actually higher than 4%. Then they became 4%, which means more like a 3-point-something yield.
It is.
Nevertheless,
Yeah.
if you carry these to their logical conclusion, at some point you're going to have a $10 fare and $50 tolls, and
But
that's
it's
just not
always
sustainable.
useful every time it comes up to say, this has been instituted because you don't want the 10% increase.
It
or-
doesn't matter, they then go out.
It may not matter,
They
but
then
it
go out
does.
and interview the riders, and they
It-
find everybody. who
That's
has
right,
it.
And
but
interestingly,
it's important to
In
have
those,
on the
in those
record.
interviews that Trudy just referred to, at least many of the ones I saw, aside from the usual pay more to get less, you know, the service stinks, or I
Larry.
used the term that Larry used, the service sucks,
Yeah.
but if there were any
No, that
number,
was said publicly.
it was
I
said
know,
publicly,
and
that's why I
I know
just
some
said
people,
that.
that's why I'm laughing, because I know
I was
someone.
pretty surprised. But many writers said, if the service was better, I would not mind. And maybe that's something we ought to press for. You know,
Yeah.
service improvement related fare hikes, or something that, you know, and you know, I think it's fair game, and I have asked Andy, and I think many of you will probably want to say, what will qualify for success in this area, and this area? Because I think those metrics are something we want
Just
to
as
know.
was brought up,
Yes.
goals.
Yeah, but
What are the goals?
Goals are one thing.
You know what will constitute success? When they don't have to, when trains aren't taken out of service, that it's not what is on a chart or on a flow chart. It's the facts become irrelevant. As I
experience.
always say, it's the perception and it's the perception. of the
Reliability,
rider.
adherence to schedules,
But
less
let me
dwell
ask, can I
time.
ask another question about
Let me just see if I can
funding?
finish that thought.
Okay.
Dwell time. Much better management, which you now have because you actually have emergency medical personnel along
Communication.
places. You actually have much quicker rebound from a sick passenger now
That's the
in Midtown.
resiliency from an incident.
Yes,
is a big
resiliency
help.
is
And
the key.
communication with the, what they want to call customers, I still call them.
Yeah,
Well, the interesting, the
that's something
council,
Sarah is
the
very
council
big on.
could put together a list of criteria
No,
we're looking for, you're looking
I'm
for.
telling, Andy is going to talk about that today a lot. Can I just ask one question on the board meeting on finances?
Yeah.
Are the mayor's people still blocking congestion pricing?
No, actually, Veronica has come out in favor of congestion pricing, and I think Carl has too, to be quite honest. So I think that's two
They are
right
in
there.
favor,
And they
yes.
don't
Carl
like,
has come out?
Yes.
Of course, now he's left.
First of all, they don't have enough votes to block per se, but they have come out in favor of congestion
No, but
pricing.
they've spoken very adamantly against it.
And the mayor has sort of relaxed his if you heard his public statements, I don't know what he's done in private.
Andrew, no.
well, the city board members have not shown up, they have not expressed opposition.
No, they have
to
not.
pricing.
They really have not
Recently.
recently.
Yeah, no, well,
I don't think-
everything's,
I can't think of the
Going
last
forward.
time.
Right, Jim?
Is the tax increase on taxes, is that in effect officially?
January 1.
That will be, that's been approved.
And I think that will actually affect ridership on the system, because when you see how big a nut it is just to get into one of these vehicles after the surcharge, you may think twice. So that will, and
Okay,
plus that'll be a source of money.
Do we know what it is?
250, now, what is unclear to me at this stage is, right now, there's a 50-cent yellow cab surcharge for MTA, but it's actually 80 cents on the meter, which goes much higher in rush hours. I don't know if the 250 is instead of those or in addition to those. That has not been spelled out to me yet. If it's in addition to those, that would be $6 before you even stepped into a yellow cab. That would put them at a great disadvantage.
I don't think they did not
It's not just
repeal
on
the
cabs, though, isn't it,
MTA
on
charge, so that.
Oh.
Isn't it on Ubers and
Well,
Lyft?
50 cents is an MTA charge.
Yeah, no, but they didn't repeal that, so.
No, but isn't this on Ubers and Lyfts
It
and
is.
everything? It's not just on yellow cabs?
Is it the same amount?
I think so.
I don't,
So all of a sudden, that ride won't be as quite as reasonable.
it's higher for the yellow cabs.
Yeah.
Many people at the board meeting in the public session also spoke on the new Curb app for accessible trips. Many people are thrilled with it. They want it to continue beyond the November test period, and it's likely that it will, because people seem to really be very happy with it.
Yeah,
You've heard that too?
yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's been a lot of compliments, and it's been a lot of people been actually saying it's much easier for them, because half of them, the advocates were there next to me, sitting next to me, was like preaching the choir. And for once to hear them saying that they love it, the only thing that just be nice is if they have the curb cut with accessibility vans, like the accessible dispatch, if that can be added in, that would have been, that could be
That's
even
up to
stronger.
DOT, of course.
And TLC.
Yeah.
Because Ron Trachtenberg did say he is trying to talk to TLC, and TLC is supposed to be working with accessible dispatch in the next few months.
That's good.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the charges are $250 for taxis, $275 for e-hails,
Mm-hmm.
so it's.
On top of
But that doesn't tell you if it's on top of the fee.
When I read the,
Or it's
when
going
I
from
saw the
50 or 80 to
legislation, it didn't have a
250.
repeal event for the
No, but they're trying
50-cent
to,
MTA fee.
they are trying to equate the yellows, because the yellows are ones that are hurting. And it was my understanding that they were trying to equate the yellows, the hail, the yellow cabs with the e-hails, with
Yeah.
Uber and Lyft. So it may be that the repeal, the current 50 cents, could you find that out?
Yes, I'm gonna find
We'll
out.
look at it, but there's a
That's-
lot of differences because e-hails pay sales tax and,
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of weird
I mean, this
things.
could really be a game changer for yellow if it's all in addition. Wow.
Yeah, or then we'll commit
Yeah.
suicide.
Okay, so that's it for the board. There is no board meeting in August, but there could be briefings, so we will see what transpires with that. A lot of the discussion we will continue when President Byford is here, because a lot of it he will bring up, and there's no need to go over it twice. So we have a bylaw, second reading of the bylaw changes, Bill?
Yes, we did.
This was introduced last month, I believe.
Yeah.
I thought that was empty.
You can do that.
Yep, have a copy of
That'll be
this.
under old business.
Bradley, is this the one?
What is this, what are you asking for?
Yeah.
No, but the bylaw reading, which I'm not finding right now, what we're doing is we're changing, we would be changing the length of term of our officers, which is the chair, the vice chair, and the executive committee from 1 year to a 2-year term. And that's all, that's all, that's.
That is
That's
what,
all
that
it does.
comports with the Long Island Railroad and
It
Metro
would
North
be,
Commuter Council, is that correct?
Yes, the other councils and of course PCAC all use 2-year terms because the Transit Riders Council is the only council with determinate terms. The members officially have 2-year terms on the council. They're, obviously the officers' terms were made to be shorter because they didn't want somebody being an officer and then being off the having their term expire and being off the council. But that has not come to pass. Very seldom are people replaced. Most of you have been on the council for, I would say, at least twice the 2-year term. So I don't think there's any necessity to keep it to a 1-year term, and that way we or you won't have to vote every June on new members of the officers.
I have a question. So when would it go into effect? if
Hold on,
it's-
Marisol's asking a question.
So when would it go into effect?
With next year's election.
So next year's election will be.
Yeah, because the terms expire. The terms of the officers we elected last month expired in 2019, at 2019, June 2019, after the June 2019 meeting. So that's when.
That's what current terms
Do you
expire.
Yes.
do you want it to be brought up, do you want a resolution? How do
We
you
need
do
to
this?
vote on it.
Okay, then I'm
So you're resolving to approve. Making a
I am
motion, okay.
making a motion that we accept or that we make the, whatever he just said.
Yes.
To approve, okay.
Yeah,
Approve
a motion to approve
the
the
change
term
of
of office.
Second,
of officers' terms.
second,
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Any discussion, or have we discussed this enough?
Enough,
Enough.
enough.
Okay,
With more form.
all those in favor?
That looks like a nameless.
Unanimous.
Yeah, because the only person I hear is you.
And Miss Edith?
Who?
Just eat it.
No, I did mine. 9.
It's a good thing it's nine, you could have ran out of fingers.
Yeah,
5 and 5, then.
And I don't think we have anybody left to vote.
I don't think we do.
That's like fine color.
Okay, so, yeah, let's do, old business. Trudy.
Yes, well, I would like, yesterday, many of us, Chris, well, I won't say who, Andrew will talk about it. We had my long nudge for bus meeting, and it was very, very good. So I would like to thank publicly and go into the minutes to thank Bill and Andrew for putting up with all my nudging and for making that meeting happen. But it was for those of us who were